others, and most importantly, it's consistent with the values of the American people. It's those values that determine what an appropriate punishment is within the context of our criminal justice system.
Okay? Last speaker on that line, and then you'll be the last speaker on this line. Go ahead.
Judge Markman, my name is Luke McCarthy. Thank you for coming tonight. You strike me as a man who has a deep...
The next comment has to be to the proponents.
Oh, then to
the opponents.
Okay, to anyone who would like to answer that.
Okay.
In 32 of the 38 states which currently have the death penalty, state court judges who review those cases, including post-conviction hearings, must stand for periodic election or retention. Would you please reconcile that fact with de Tocqueville's tyranny of the majority?
I'll have to hear that again. You'll have to repeat that question, please. Where are you?
And he has to direct it, I think, as well.
Well, he's directing it to that table because he's on that.
Unfortunately, the question really doesn't direct quite well to the nation's side of view, and I had intended for Judge Markman.
Ask the question again, and we'll...
I had unfortunately intended for Judge Markman to answer it. In 32 of the 38 states, which currently have the death penalty as a legal form of punishment, the state court judges who preside over those hearings, including post-conviction review, in which case a technicality may come to light in which a new trial may be offered. Those judges have to stand in 32 of the 38 states for election or retention. Are they therefore subject to de Tocqueville's tyranny of the majority? In other words, are they subject to public opinion and not the true application of the law?
I've got you now. I think the question, in a sense, answers itself. But for those who doubt the force or pungency of the question, there is some very excellent new work on the politicization of the judiciary that's involved in the capital punishment question, and on the very clearly politicized and opportunistic decisions made by judges up for re-election, who may often, so to speak, stage executions, as their political masters have indeed done, as I spent some time saying, in their own behalfs. Yes, that's absolutely true, and it's a clear and present danger to everything that's meant by the image of justice as detached and disembodied.
Last question.
My name is Jennifer Washburn. This question is actually directed to the Reverend Jackson.
No. Next.
Well,
next, please.
It's a question that either side can answer.
I can't help it.
We have rules. I'll put it to the National Review then.
Okay.
The National Review has blamed rising levels of crime essentially on the reforms of the 1960s, of the criminal justice system in the 1960s. Is that to say that the two panelists from the National Review do not believe that there are other better deterrents to crime than capital punishment? For instance, education, jobs programs, ways to deal with other social imbalances in our society.
Okay.
It seems the courts for years have been explaining to us that poverty and morality are not synonymous, that we don't have in poverty a ground for excluding people from states. And it's okay, Uncle Fred, you've done your bit already. You could... I suddenly realized where I saw him. He played the male lead in the Noel Coward story. Yes. Right. I forgot.
Okay.
What was the question? What was the question?
Just answer is...
What was the question? I can't recall the question.
Are there other reasons why, other than capital punishment, that crime has fallen?
We understand that even though the country is richer than it was in the Depression, the rate of homicide has increased. We know that education, the rising levels of education and rising levels of income are not enough to deal with this problem. At a certain point, when we fall into that slot, we seem to treat this problem as one yielding to root causes. And we use the language of social science to indicate that the criminal behavior of people is essentially determined by these demographic forces. At the same time, when we fall into that mode of thinking about it, what we seem to do is withdraw from the sense that these people out there are not simply automatons, determined in their behavior by some natural forces, but they are responsible agents who make decisions and ought to be held responsible. So as Mayor Koch once said, as soon as people start talking about these root causes, they seem to give grounds for dissolving responsibility. I would rather recall the grounds of their citizenship and remind them that they're capable of bearing responsibility.
Okay, we're at the end, just before the closing remarks, and we started with the nation. So, in closing, we'll now start with National Review, and the nation will close. Please, you have 4 minutes. Our timekeeper will keep the time, and you can divide it any way you wish.
One story I couldn't tell because of the compression of time was of a student of mine, Bob Mason, who had a coach in Little League in Los Angeles, and that coach made his way to Canada, where he was in a state of distraction and depression, held up a cab driver, killed the man, and in his panic left his briefcase there, and when he was fouled up, he confessed instantly, was immediately affected by remorse. I'm glad that we didn't have an execution there to add to the situation of a man expiating his guilt. My colleagues seem to have slid past our argument. We were willing, for the sake of argument, to concede most of these instances. If you want, we could even adopt a formula comparable to that in the Constitution about treason, when you require 2 witnesses to an overt act. We could forego most of the executions, and it would still not deal with the essential problem in principle. And that is, if you have a case like one we came up in Frederick County of a fellow who killed his cousin with 8 eyewitnesses and with the initials of the victim on the bullets, we're pretty clear as to who done it without mistakes. The question we're posing is, can you conceive of a situation in which this kind of punishment would indeed be justified? And we would give you most of the other cases. The Reverend Jackson says that no one has a right to kill anybody unless it's a woman's choice. And at that moment, we don't raise the question. We don't raise the question of whether it's a human being or whether you're withdrawing a whole class of human beings from the domain of circle of people who are protected by the law, or for whom we need to give justifications when we take lives. We simply invoke this label. We might as well say that whether people are executed should be the victim's choice. And we could solve the problem. How nice to get around the problem simply by invoking formulas, or perhaps even, in our answers, we could just give the answer that's adequate for ourselves. I could just hum a few bars of Melancholy Baby. That's the answer I regard as sufficient. I think we may be at a situation